It is the year 1541. An expedition of heavily armed Spanish conquistadors is hacking its way through the green heart of the Amazon. This is the absolute deadliest, best-equipped military machine Europe has ever produced. The men are wearing steel breastplates, forged iron helmets, thick leather boots, and heavy padded wool doublets underneath. They carry muskets, crossbows, and Toledo steel blades that slice through bone like butter. They are walking fortresses, but after just 3 weeks in this jungle, nobody is firing a musket. The walking fortresses are breaking down in the mud, crying. Their enemies aren't hostile armies. They are tiny, invisible killers. The skin of the conquistadors is literally rotting away underneath that heavy wool. Tiny scratches from thorns turn into massive, necrotic ulcers. Flesh-eating parasites bore into their legs and lay eggs inside open wounds. The men suffer fever dreams, sweat blood, and die miserable deaths from malaria. When they pull off their thick leather boots, the rotting skin from the soles of their feet just rips right off with them. They are being digested, alive, by the jungle. But while the armored Europeans die in agony, they are being watched from the dense greenery by indigenous tribes who have lived in this exact spot for thousands of years. They wear no helmets, they wear no boots. They are almost completely naked, and they are in perfect health. Their skin isn't rotting. They don't have flesh-eating worms in their legs. They move through this biological meat grinder like they have the ultimate God mode turned on. How could a group of naked hunters survive and thrive in the deadliest ecosystem on Earth, while the most heavily armored army in history died choking on its own sweat? To understand this brutal genius, you have to look at what steel armor does to the human body at 95% humidity. The Europeans thought their armor would protect them from the jungle. In reality, they built themselves portable crematoriums. The human body cools itself by sweating. When sweat evaporates on the skin, it pulls heat away from the body. But in the Amazon, the air is already at 95% humidity. The sweat cannot evaporate. If you throw a thick layer of wool, leather, and an absolutely airtight steel plate over that, you create the perfect incubator. The temperature under the steel spikes to well over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The pores of the skin clog up. Bacteria living on the skin explode in numbers. And then comes the biggest problem, the boots. The Spanish wore heavy, knee-high leather boots. In the jungle, it rains constantly, and you are wading through rivers and swamps every single day. The water pours into the boots and never comes back out. The leather holds the water like a bucket. After a few days in, wet, hot leather, something called immersion foot or jungle rot sets in. The tissue of your feet absorbs so much water that the skin swells up, turns white, and starts to dissolve. The blood vessels constrict. The tissue dies. When a conquistador pulled off his boot after a week of marching to relieve the pain, he often tore off massive chunks of his own dead skin. The raw meat was exposed, a perfect target for the billions of spores and bacteria in the jungle mud. The Europeans were technological masterpieces, but biological sacrifices. They didn't lose to the jungle. They marinated themselves in their own clothing. The indigenous tribes didn't have this problem. They didn't know steel, but they had hacked jungle survival on a microscopic level. Before I show you the absolutely genius botanical trick they used to eliminate the deadliest killer in human history, smash that subscribe button below this video. If you want the uncensored, brutal history that Hollywood refuses to show you, join the ranks of savage ingenuity. Subscribe right now. Here is the jungle survival hack. For the Europeans, the jungle was a battlefield that required armor. The indigenous tribes knew the truth. In the jungle, armor is a death sentence. Cheat code. Number 1. The naked armor. Clothing in the tropics is a trap. Naked skin wasn't backwardness. It was high-precision engineering. Without clothes, skin dries off much faster, even in extreme humidity, as long as there is a slight breeze. Fungi and bacteria can't find damp folds of fabric to breed in. A bare foot, accustomed to the rough jungle floor, develops an extremely thick, leathery callus that deflects thorns and never softens up to jungle rot. But they weren't completely defenseless. Instead of heavy steel, they used a liquid, biological armor: mud, ash, and plant fats. They coated their bodies completely in red clay or specific plant extracts. This layer did three things at once. First, it masked the smell of human sweat, which attracts predators and insects. Second, it acted as the perfect sunscreen. Third, when the mud dried on the skin, it formed a microfine, hard crust. Mosquitoes and botflies looking to lay eggs under the skin couldn't pierce this dried-out shell. Naked skin, combined with dirt, was a far more effective barrier than European wool, which insects simply crawled right through and nested in. Cheat code. Number 2. The floating bed. One of the Europeans' biggest mistakes happened at night. When they set up camp, they lay on wool sleeping bags directly on the damp jungle floor. The floor of the Amazon is a toxic carpet. It is the hunting ground for highly venomous centipedes, army ants that can overrun a camp in minutes, and parasites that react to body heat and burrow straight into the skin of sleeping soldiers. The indigenous peoples invented a piece of technology that everyone knows today, but its brutal survival purpose has been completely forgotten. The hammock. Woven from incredibly strong plant fibers, it suspended the sleeping area 3 feet above the ground, tied between 2 trees. This design is a masterpiece. It completely isolates the sleeper from the moisture and the flesh-eating hunters on the jungle floor. At the same time, the open net allows for perfect 360-degree air circulation around the body, cooling the sweat and stopping fungal infections dead in their tracks. The Spanish were eaten alive in their sleep. The tribes hovered untouchable in the air. Cheat code. Number 3. Botanical artillery. All these hacks kept bacteria and fungi away, but the true final boss of the jungle flies, the Anopheles mosquito, the carrier of malaria. When the conquistadors were struck by malaria, they applied the most advanced European medicine of their time: bloodletting. They thought the feverish hot blood had to be drained from the body, so they slashed their veins or applied leeches, letting liters of blood spill into bowls. It was catastrophic. They drained the last remaining red blood cells from their already weak, dehydrated bodies, massively accelerating their own deaths. The indigenous peoples of South America reached for a weapon that European science wouldn't isolate in a lab for hundreds of years. They knew about the bark of the cinchona tree. They stripped the bark, ground it up, and boiled it into an extremely bitter brew. That bark contains quinine. Quinine isn't magic. It's a highly toxic alkaloid. When that anti-malaria brew enters the bloodstream, the quinine literally blocks the malaria parasite's ability to digest human red blood cells. It poisons the poison. While educated European doctors bled their own soldiers to death, the supposedly primitive savages drank a precisely dosed biochemical antidote that shredded the parasite's DNA before it could turn lethal. When the survivors of the Spanish expeditions crawled out of the jungle shivering, half dead, with rotting feet, they hadn't found cities of gold. They had learned that all the iron and steel of the civilized world isn't worth a dime when Mother Nature decides to attack you on a cellular level. The conquistadors thought they could beat the jungle with swords and armor, like a hostile army. The indigenous peoples knew you can't fight the jungle. You can only use its tools and adapt to its architecture. The armored conquerors rotted alive because they tried to force Europe into the Amazon. The naked survived because they submitted to the rules of the jungle and turned it into their ultimate weapon. Survival in history was never about the thickest armor. It was about the fastest biological adaptation. If you want to make sure your knowledge of history's most brutal facts never rots away, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a like, comment your craziest aha moment below, and get ready for the next deep dive into the savage ingenuity of our past. I'll see you in the next video.